Greetings everyone, NaturesTemper here. Today I have something a little different. True stories of strange happenings in the great outdoors. Submitted by you, the viewers. Now, let's begin. This first story is from Jacob Becker. So I was camping in the desert with my dad and my friend, and we were sitting around the campfire with our pellet guns. Some stinky .177 caliber stuff that wouldn't do jack shit against a real threat, and just talking about things. As you do on camping trips. To our direct front is this awesome mountain that has some pretty sweet rocks and overlooks. It gets to be about 2 a.m, pitch black, save for the fire and about a 15-yard diameter circle of light that it created. I get up to piss. My friend jokingly says, "You should go piss on the mountain." So, not being one to back down from a dare, even though it really wasn't, I climbed up the mountain using nothing but a flashlight. I'm not that far up when I decide to relieve myself on a cactus and sit on a protruding ledge that overlooked the camp. So I'm sitting there looking down at the faint glow of the fire, and then back up at the perfectly clear night sky, and switching back and forth between the two. I don't quite remember how long I was up there, but at some point I noticed that there was some rustling in the bushes nearby. Keep in mind, the desert doesn't necessarily have very tall vegetation for obvious reasons, especially on a hill like I was on, so I assumed it was a mouse or something like that. Nonetheless, I was a bit startled by it, so I decided it was now about the time to come down the hill and regroup at the fire. As I was walking down cautiously to avoid falling on any rocks or cactus, the weirdest phenomenon kept happening. As my boots crunched on the dirt, it didn't sound like that of just one footfall. Instead, it was like there was someone behind me that was just walking along with a perfect step as to match their footfalls in mine, so I wouldn't notice them. Of course, every time I turned around to check, there was nothing, so I chalked it up to my imagination, until I heard the wind whisper my name. You know how sometimes when it's really quiet, you think you can hear someone calling your name? Well, it wasn't like that. This was a drawn-out whisper that was faint, but I could easily tell that it was an actual sound and not something in my head. It was a voice, but it was only said in a gust of wind. It was the strangest thing, and it made all the hairs on my body stand on end. I started to move faster, and the crunching of dirt beneath boots became more separatable from mine, until I was moving as fast as I could down the hill, which felt like it was getting taller and taller, and as I was getting further and further from the bottom with every step. Every time the wind blew, a new voice's whisper spoke. Sometimes it was my name. Sometimes it was a word. Sometimes it was completely incomprehensible. And then I made it to the bottom after all that. I stood in the safety of the fire's glow with my friend and our dad, and I pretended like nothing had actually happened. To me, it felt like hours had passed, but my dad looked at his watch and said it was like, "Oh, it's only 2:15 and we should go to bed." I'd only been up on the mountain for 15 minutes, so I chalked it up to me being crazy. We went to bed and I'd convinced myself that I was just losing my mind. My dad fell asleep no problem, and I was certain that both my friend and his dad passed out as well. But I laid awake in my sleeping bag, in the tent, listening to the wind rustle the canvas. It was kind of soothing to hear the wind acting like wind. But then I started to hear footsteps outside a little way off, which I'd grown accustomed to. Normally that meant someone had gotten up to pee in the middle of the night, and you could normally hear the sound of pressurized piss hitting the dirt, but that never came. So I assumed it was an animal of some sort, like a coyote or something scavenging through our garbage. So that was that, and eventually I managed to doze off. At around 5 a.m, and yes, I did only get about 2 hours that night, I woke up and decided I was going to make breakfast. So I left my tent, quietly, and was about to start unpacking when I remembered the 2 footfalls thing. Knowing that I was just crazy, I walked up the mountain to the ledge and stared around for a bit. I found that there was absolutely zero vegetation in the area, but there were very clear patterns of boots in the dirt. My shoes at the time left a distinct pokeball shape in the dirt, but very faint in the dirt was a second set of indents, although the shape of it was all wrong. It was like a paw print, but it wasn't animalistic like a coyote's or a fox, or anything I've seen before. I know that is pretty cliche, but the part that freaked me out the most was that about 20 yards away from where I was, I found the mutilated corpse of a jackrabbit. All of its meat was intact, and it looked to have been ripped open by the ribcage and just left to bleed to death. This one is from Katt Turner. Hello, I'm Katt, I'm 19, and I'm here to tell you about something that really messed me up and therapy isn't working. So in 2013, when I was 14, I was very adventurous, and living in the backwoods of Kentucky was perfect for that. I'd always grab my big sister and cousin and head out to the woods. We even found a small waterfall behind my house. But one day, instead of heading down to the waterfall, my sister, I'll call her Alex for privacy, suggested we go over to this girl's house that she recently befriended at school. Being the one with no friends at school, I thought it would be an opportunity to make a new one. The house was only about half a mile away. My cousin, let's call her Ivy, Alex and I headed off to the house. When I got there, I was in shock. The house looked abandoned. We knocked on the door, and a girl did answer. She instantly hugged Alex and invited us in. We were greeted with an extremely filthy room with an old TV box on the floor with 7 Deadly Sins DVD title screen on repeat. Watching the TV was who I assumed was her mother. She kinda looked like she was on drugs. Skipping the hours, we just hung around the house. Heather, Alex's friend, wanted to show us something cool, so we headed out to the woods. We walked for a while, but after a bit, we started to get a bad vibe from this part of the woods. I thought that was weird because I've been everywhere in the woods and never felt this feeling. But my sister ignored my warnings and we trekked on. Soon enough we saw a barn. The barn again looked abandoned, worse than the house. As we walked in, we were greeted with horses with hooves doing loops way past their knee. Don't worry, as soon as I got home I reported it. We fed them, they were surprisingly friendly. We headed to the house next to the barn. It looked like it had been burnt down and all the doors and windows were boarded up like some zombie movie. We did see one low window open, so we climbed through, and we were at the base of the staircase. For some reason we chose to go up there first. There was only one small room up there with an old iron bed with a flat stained mattress on it. Looking around at the walls, I noticed that this part of the house was seemingly untouched by the cinders. Again, the weird feeling came back as I saw what was on the wall. Behind the peeling flower wallpaper was newspaper trimmings of deaths from the tri-state area all the way back to the 1960s. Again, Alex ignored me and said, "Come on, let's go downstairs." I sighed heavily and followed. Ivy also wanted to go home, but never wanted to go by herself. Skipping again a bit, I walked out of what I thought was a kitchen from the old cracked oven and headed over to Alex, who looked frozen. "Alex, what is it?" I questioned, walking into the room and slowly following her gaze. At that moment, my blood seemingly left my body. There, nailed to the wall, was an old decapitated head. I yelled loudly, demanding to leave, so that everyone could hear. But looking back, that was pretty stupid. We took off and ran all the way back to Heather's house, greeted by the police. My parents filed a missing person report because we were apparently gone a bit too long. One strange thing was, after all this happened, I revisited the house on Google Earth, and it wasn't there. Also, Heather never existed at the school. To this day, I don't know who or what I saw. The Windigo is Real by Mario Orner. I never had much going for me in my younger stage of life. Out in the Hungarian forests, not much happens, isolated, dark, and sometimes can be quite lonely. Of course, I wasn't always alone. I had my trusted grandparents with me whilst my mother had gone away to England on a business trip. My usual routine was go to school, come back home for lunch, and after school, go to the woods with my grandfather to spot some deer and occasionally some bears. I was in my usual place at school when the lunch bell rang. I was happy to hear that beautiful sound so I could go home and have some of my grandmother's amazing food. As soon as I got home, I noticed something was kind of off. My grandfather was nowhere to be seen, so I went straight to my grandmother and asked about it. "Grandfather's already gone to the woods, darling. You're going to have to catch him after school." I thought this was quite strange, as he always waits for me, but I brushed it off, seeing as it was lunchtime. I took my bike at lunch so I didn't have to wait any longer after I finished school. I got off and started biking straight after I finished my 5th lesson. I didn't see many cars or even people. This was somehow calming, knowing that I didn't have to look out for cars all the way there, so I knew the 20-minute bike ride would be a breeze. Halfway there, I realized that I had forgotten food and water, and I guessed that my grandfather brought some with him. As I'm minding my own business, thinking about the big antlers we might find and take home, I see my grandfather's bike just up ahead in a ditch on the left side of the road near the forest entrance. I knew it was his because it had a specific gun holster on its side. I was crazy about guns and hoped he brought it with him for some protection. Soon after entering the forest, I saw no one. There wasn't a soul around, and neither was my grandfather. I walked through the forest and felt adrenaline rush through my body as I saw a few elk walking around. I had to duck down because I didn't want to draw attention to myself. A very peculiar realization came across my mind. I was an 11-year-old boy in the middle of the woods at sundown, without anyone in sight. While getting distracted by that thought, I looked back at the elk and there was only one left. It was just eating something on the floor. I couldn't see it as I ducked down behind a little dirt pile in front of me. The creature stood up on its 2 hind legs, revealing a tall, lanky-looking humanoid with antlers on its head. My heart raced and I almost threw up seeing some of its rotten flesh. I needed a few minutes looking at the creature to examine its features and looks. It was a very tall, and at my young age even taller. The antlers were covered in blood and rotten flesh from the carcass it was devouring earlier, I thought. It had very long arms and fingernails, long enough to almost reach the floor, and I could smell an odor impossible to describe. I just wanted to get the fuck out of there. That thing wasn't right. I thought about backing up, but I knew it was getting dark. As soon as I would catch the creature's attention, it would outpace me easily. It suddenly picked up what it was eating, and I didn't look for more than a second. I just wanted to find my granddad. A blood-curdling scream came from further on its direction as it focused its head towards it and ran with a lightning speed. This was my chance. I was only a few meters away from my bike, I thought. I made a break for it. With every piece of my energy, I sprinted faster than I could remember, and every second I felt like the creature was behind me, just about to grab my body and pull me back into the darkness of the forest. I finally got to my bike, and my granddad's bike was gone. I never saw or heard it move from behind me, but it wasn't there. I didn't have much time, so I jumped on my bike and started pedaling as hard as I could, and heard that scream one last time. It felt like it was right in my ear. I didn't look back once as I pedaled home. The darkness surrounded me as I got home, was getting late and I quickly swung the door open and locked it with all my speed. I was so scared and frightened that I didn't even realize my pants were soaking wet and stunk of wee. I got to my room and stayed awake all night peeping outside the window every second. I swear I could hear that scream again that night. After that event, I never saw my granddad, and still to this day I don't know if that thing, that abomination, was eating my beloved granddad, or if he had just gotten lost. I never knew where his bike had gone either. I'm just dreading the day that I hear that scream again. Next one is from Chardy McDennis. Well, I'll try to make this short and sweet. This night camping really fucked with my head for a very long time. It still does when I put too much into it. Anyway, I was about 12 or 13 when my family and I went on a camping trip with another family. It was in northern Alabama, so places to camp were quite abundant, and so were the creepy stories. We went to a place I had never been before. All I really remember from this trip is that it was close to a supposed haunted house people called Moody Brick. Well, that could be the town. Hell, I can't remember. All I know is that Moody Brick is a real place and it's really fucking scary. We arrived at this bridge where we fished and swam. The day started pretty normally. I remember me and my friends caught a fish and his dad showed us how to clean it, and we cooked and ate it right there on the riverside. My brother got sunburnt and my mum got eaten alive by mosquitoes. My friend, his mum and dad were all having a good time though. So were my brother and me and my stepdad. Mum, not so much. Well, night was rolling around and we drove on down a trail a little ways away and set up camp. We started cooking up marshmallows and stuff and telling jokes and stories. A cicada jumped in our fire and I burned myself trying to get it out. Then my stepdad told us a scary story about some haunted fucking train, and it didn't scare anyone. But my friend's dad was the only one who didn't find this story funny. He got serious. He told us that we should be more respectful towards the dead and the people that lived here long before us, assuming he meant Native Americans, and that we would summon something we didn't want to deal with. Then he told us a story about how we were actually on a huge burial ground and at night floating orbs came out of the water and floated up the hill and moved through everything in their paths. And if they ever touched you, you shouldn't move. He stated that they would freeze you and drain all the heat from your body, and if you touch them, they will materialize and possibly wreak even more havoc. Of course, everyone thought he was just trying to scare us. I was the only one that was intrigued by the story and started asking him a million questions. I remember thinking that he's one hell of an actor, or telling the truth, because he never broke character or gave in and said otherwise. We all went to our tents and went to sleep. All was normal. I woke up suddenly and noticed I was freezing. It's the middle of summer in Alabama and it's 90 degrees at night time, but when I woke up I could see my breath. I looked at my brother and saw his breath. I heard a weird sound from outside of our tent. I shouted my friend's dad's name, thinking he was fucking with me. It was a low, weird hum that almost had a tune but didn't. I laid back down and bundled up and tried to put it all out of my head, but I just couldn't. The hum got louder. Then I heard splashing in the water down the hill from our camp. My heart started beating fast. I opened our tent and peered down the hill. What I saw scared the absolute shit out of me. Thousands, and I mean thousands, of little white lights moving in unison. Definitely was not the lightning bugs. This light was white, and they all moved together. I screamed, but it was like whatever was there muffled the sound coming from my mouth. I freaked plumb the fuck out and collapsed in the tent and noticed my brother was awake. His face was white as the lights outside. He stared at me and we both knew what was going on. I'll never forget as long as I live what he said next. He said no in his 15-year-old southern accent, and he starts shaking. Then the lights start moving towards us. We knew we were fucked. I guess when you're that scared, you turn back into a toddler, as me and my brother embraced. Shaken to death, I called him a name from our childhood. I said, "Don't move, Mike. It'll all be over soon." He whimpered as the lights passed through our tent, and so did I. I pissed all over myself and even him. We laid there, trying our best to be still, but I couldn't. He started screaming when a light got close to me. I could not sit still anymore. I twitched my left wrist. It was cold, and it immediately got bigger. Me and my brother started crying like sissies as the light dimmed and formed into the silhouette of a person. I heard another scream from a tent next to ours. It was our mum. The silhouette then gasped as if we startled it, and it tried to move through the tent, but it couldn't. It eventually broke the tent poles from trying, and we heard its footsteps run back towards the water. Me and my brother ran down the trail towards our truck with our mum right on our heels, encouraging us not to stop. We didn't until we piled all inside the cab of the truck. We sat there for a few hours, debating what to do. We assumed that everyone else was dead. We were so freaked out that we decided not to go back to our camp to check on anyone until daybreak. Right before the sunrise, we saw a shirtless figure come down the trail. It was my stepdad. He played 21 questions with us and didn't believe anything we said, even though my mum told him she tried to wake him up. But they drank the night before and he was passed out. When we got back, my friend's family were mad, thinking we played a sick prank on them. Except for his dad. His dad knew, and he told his wife that we were telling the truth, but she just told him to shut up. The tent had been knocked down. They thought that me and my brother took the prank too far. But my mum saw it. We saw it. It was so goddamn surreal, I swear it really happened. And to this day, I have dreams. I'm clutching my brother as we shiver in the cold, laying on the ground, and I say those words. Don't move, Mag. Don't move. Thanks for watching. If you have any opinions on the stories, share it in the comments. If you have any stories of your own, send them to my email, naturestemper5@gmail.com. There's a copy of it in the description, along with the links to the author's pages. Please, check them out if you can. The rules to submissions have changed since last time, so rules are 700 words or less. They must be grammatically correct, so be sure to proofread it before you send it in. Grammatically poor stories will be scrapped. And last but not least, these must be true stories of real encounters with the paranormal. Anyways, that's all. Until next time, you monsters.